Welcome to Oh God, What Now? I'm Dorian Lynskey. On today's show, we have the 12 villains of Christmas, from Miriam Cates and her awful mates to mad-haired racists in the Netherlands. We'll run down our picks for the Dirty Dozen who made 2023 worse than it needed to be. And in the extra bit for Patreon backers, we're turning off the news for a few minutes to discuss our holiday traditions. Let's meet the manel. It's not a manel, thank God. Let's meet the panel. First up, it's commentator Alex Andreou. Hello, Alex.
Hi, Dorian.
On Tuesday, Rishi Sunak was up in front of the liaison committee being grilled by MPs on everything from Rwanda to Israel. How did he get on? Was he charming as usual?
Not great. I mean, he's generally speaking better at this sort of thing than he is at anything else. And this was not a great one for him. I think that the finances of the Rwanda plan have the potential to actually become a huge story. There is clearly a lot of cross-party anger at the idea that the PM can sign us up to a 5-year plan, the cost of which Parliament cannot even know until years after it's already been paid. And he's excused that this is commercially sensitive because apparently he might be talking to other third countries about similar deals. I don't think that makes it better. I think that makes it actually worse. Because it's like, well, how many countries do you think you can do deals worth hundreds and hundreds of millions that we can't even know about?
Is it going to be like a dictator bidding war, where you just get various despots around the world?
I don't understand. I just don't understand how he expects Parliament to keep voting for something and places like the Public Accounts Committee to keep approving the value for money of something that they can't know how much is paid to it. So I think that's going to blow up into a massive row because there was a lot of Tories that were annoyed about it in the Liaisons Committee, as well as Labour people like Diana Johnson and who's the head of the Public Accounts? Meg Hillier. Yes, people like Dame Diana Johnson, Dame Meg Hillier pursuing it, and they're quite dogged and quite forensic. And then I think the second notable feature was his heated exchange with Alicia Kearns, who is a conservative, on how he intends to vote at the UN on the motion demanding a sustained humanitarian pause in Israel. And I think that is significant because anything from the opposition would be dismissed as politicking. So its origin being within his own party makes it a much more uncomfortable question that he needs to answer in a much more rational way.
Did he answer it?
Saying that, no, I mean, he kept saying that too many civilians have died, but then he kept saying that Israel is free to defend herself. And to me, those things, there is a conflict at some point, right? Some point arrives where what you're doing exceeds what you have permission to do. And he seems to be avoiding it at the moment. I mean, the fact that the vote at the UN has been postponed until today, Wednesday, when we're recording, is probably good news. It probably means they're trying to find some wording that everyone can agree on.
Rachel Cunliffe is Associate Political Editor at The New Statesman. Hello, Rachel.
Hello.
Peter Bone MP has lost his seat after a recall petition following his suspension from the House over allegations of bullying and sexual harassment. He'd already lost the Tory whip. So bang the by-election gong, because Wellingborough is going to the polls next year.
It is. It's going to be an exciting one.
He's taken it very well, isn't he?
He's taken it totally well. Yeah, lots of faith in the process. No complaints at all. No, he sounded off about it on Twitter. So the way it works is that if you are suspended for more than 10 days, and the suspension happens when Parliament has to vote on it, so MPs have to vote on it, for more than 10 days, there's a recall petition, and if 10% of your constituents want a by-election, there is a by-election. And those are the rules, and those have that is the established precedent. But he has said that because just over 13% of his constituents signed the petition and wanted a by-election, that means that the overwhelming majority, over 86% of them, didn't, and therefore
probably love him.
Therefore, they love him, and we shouldn't have one. Which is kind of not like, just because someone didn't sign the petition, doesn't mean that they wanted to keep him. And obviously, if you really believed that, you could fight the seat and actually have an election to see. But he will not be the candidate.
But the rules are the rules, and he respects the rules of British democracy.
No.
As opposed to the European Union. So
I think we should think carefully about possibly banking this logic. I quite like it, for example, when it comes to things like Brexit, because it means that 27 million people obviously loved being a member of the EU.
I mean,
right?
Anyone who doesn't vote agrees with me. I think, the policy.
So we're going to have a by-election.
Yeah.
And it's a by-election that the Conservatives probably should win in normal times because he's got a majority of 18,000. They've held the seat since 2005. But none of the Conservatives I spoke to think they're going to win it. They're all like, oh, God, not another one. And they, obviously, majorities of 19,000, 20,000, 24,000 have been overturned in the last year. And we've probably got another one coming up as well with I've just suddenly forgotten
Scott Benton.
Scott Benton.
Yeah.
And who obviously has been found to have broken parliamentary lobbying rules and sleaze rules. And it just seems like these are coming up more and more often. So we don't know exactly when the general election is going to be, but there will be at least one by-election in the first few months of the year to look forward to.
I'm genuinely looking forward to it very much.
Maybe there won't be a general election. Maybe we'll just keep having a series of endless by-elections until everyone is replaced.
Yeah, just a war of attrition.
The ship of Theseus approached Parliament.
Yeah. It's basically long by-election.
Yeah, just one long by-election. Matt Green is a comedian enjoying his Christmas break before embarking on a national tour in the new year. Hello, Matt.
Hello.
The Colorado Supreme Court has barred Donald Trump from running for president in the state under its insurrection clause because he tried to do an insurrection. The conservative-dominated US Supreme Court will doubtless overturn the decision as soon as it gets the chance. In the meantime, there's some disagreement about obviously the judgment and so on. I wonder if such legal obstacles do him a favour by painting him as a victim of the deep state and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it is the first time that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment has been used against someone who's a presidential candidate because he's the first presidential candidate to have engaged in insurrection or rebellion, I think. And it's quite interesting because it's part of this attempt by a group called Free Speech for People. They're a group who've been trying this in lots of other states. It hasn't worked in other states, but the Colorado court did actually uphold it. And I think, I'll be honest, the problem with this whole thing is that it's a measure, I think, of how depressingly predictable everything is at the moment in politics. As soon as I read it this morning, I just thought, I wonder how he's going to get out of this one. There was not a tiny part of me thinking, wow, maybe this is it. Maybe he's actually come up against something that could stop him. Every time he gets involved in a legal problem, his poll ratings go up, his donations go up. He was actually kind of neck and neck with Ron DeSantis until the first legal case was brought against him last year or earlier this year, and now suddenly he's massively ahead. So, yeah, it feels like whatever happens, he becomes sort of invulnerable to this kind of thing.
Well, I hate to follow Godwin's law, but I've been researching Nazi Germany recently, and
generally bad. Do we feel it was generally bad?
Haven't changed.
There were very fine people on both sides.
Haven't changed my mind. Still pretty disapproving.
Yeah.
But the beer hall putsch in 1923, and Hitler went to jail, and the party was banned and so on. But he used this to show that, see, I must have a point because they're out to get me. And then anytime he was banned from a German state from speaking, they would have posters with the thing that you still see now among GB News hosts of the man with the tape, Hitler with tape over his mouth.
Yeah.
Oh no, why have I been silenced? And so it is that thing that any time you literally break the law, if something is done about it, that sort of helps you politically because it's like they're out to get me.
Yeah.
It's very hard sort of thing to fight.
And I think it works too, the analogy, because if my history is correct, it was also very much a kind of sympathetic judge after the beer hall putsch who gave him quite a light sentence, and he could have thrown away the key and said, right, that's it, you're locked up for 25 years, but he didn't. And it feels like exactly the same thing is happening with his party, that essentially the only people who can really stop Trump really are the Republican Party. They could stop him running for candidate. They could have impeached him and actually voted for the impeachment. at a point where his ratings were pretty low, and I think everyone around the world would have seen that as a really responsible thing to do. Instead, they let him get away with it, and, here we are.
Something to look forward to in 2024.
Yeah.
Now, in the streaming era, the countdown to Christmas #1 isn't what it used to be, so we've made a chart of our own, our 12 biggest villains of 2023, but it's not in ascending order of perfidy because they're all terrible, and we couldn't agree. So we're going to start in the UK and then roam further afield. Alex, you kick us off. It's Suella Braverman.
Yes.
Do you have a sound effect for that?
Da, da, da.
I think it's the sound of like a rally, a very loud rally in a football stadium, perhaps. So I haven't really been following what she's been up to. Why is she so bad?
I mean, you name it. We could do an entire podcast on things that Suella Braverman did or said that are absolutely outrageous, from, calling pro-Palestine protesters hate marchers, the BB Stockholm, the Rwanda plan, the piece of legislation that outlaw protest, fighting with the Met Police, describing sleeping rough as a lifestyle choice.
Oh, yeah.
The tofu-eating woke karate thing. When she went to America to make a speech that multiculturalism has failed, saying that people pretend to be gay in order to gain asylum, she claimed nearly 25 grand in 5 years for her London house while she was living rent-free with her parents.
And in my head.
Not against the rules. Telling a Holocaust survivor that she won't apologize for the language I've used to demonstrate the scale of the problem around immigration. That dramatic, ridiculous non-resignation letter where she wrote, "I trusted you, but you betrayed me," like it was a soap opera. I'm probably forgetting.
You've forgotten the main one for me, which is that she stepped on a guide dog.
Standing on a fucking guide dog's tail. That is almost comedy villain, right? You can't get more villainous than that. She's like a performance art of villains. But she's gone now.
She might be back. Do you think she'll be back? Not back in government, but
I think what she threatened when she went and made that speech in the House of Commons was, I believe they described as a shit grid, that they would release one scandalous, horrible thing about Sunak every day. An advent calendar of shit, another ally described it as, that would bring down the government. And I have to say, it hasn't really happened. There have been a few things, obviously, but I don't see much coming from the Braverman camp that has destabilized Sunak so far in a more significant way than her resignation did. So my sense is that the wind is no longer in her sails. I don't think the momentum is with her anymore. I think if I were Kemi Badenoch, for instance, I would be quite happy about how her thing is going.
Sorry, I've just gone blank there. Rachel, a lot of what Suella Braverman has done has been framed not in terms of pure human evil, but in terms of a leadership bid. Post-election. But as we've seen from Ron DeSantis, that sometimes the person that everybody's talking about is just goes nowhere. Meanwhile, Robert Jenrick, I read, has had a new haircut and lost a bit of weight.
Oh, yeah.
That was a pretty heavyweight bit of political journalism.
He's had a glow up.
So, what are your feelings about where the party is going to be and where Braverman is going to be? So
there's no question that she wants it and has been pitching for the leadership, and a lot of her choices over the last year, that speech in America that Alex mentioned, the speech she was the only, Michael Gove went as well, but in a kind of different capacity, the only other cabinet minister to go to the National Conservatism Conference, which was a sort of convention, a global convention in London of quite far right-wing views. And she clearly wanted to use her resignation, sacking, departure as the springboard for that. And what we've seen is that the momentum really hasn't been behind her. And Robert Jenrick, who was considered quite a moderate and a Sunak ally, when he quit as immigration minister and said, I can't stomach this, everyone kind of went, that distracted boyfriend meme. It was literally that. Meanwhile, you've got Kemi Badenoch, who's also sort of pitching for the position of candidate of the right. And I think the really important thing to remember is that the right of the Tory party is not one faction. We heard a lot about how there were 5 families, which I hate as a mafia term, and I really hate that Marc Francois really likes it. But there are different factions that are considered right-wing in different ways, but they don't particularly like each other. They don't particularly agree on a lot of stuff. And for a lot of them, Suella is not their preferred candidate. So I think the assumption that she would make it to the final two and as someone to take over from Rishi Sunak and then go to the membership, that is looking less and less likely.
Well, the right is there's always people you're not right-wing enough for. So Kemi Badenoch just announced the guidelines for schools and treating social transitioning in school, which to me were sort of cruel and unworkable, but to many people on the Tory right were
didn't go far enough.
Incredibly soft because she had not she'd not gone far, because she had not banned social transitioning in schools altogether for the small reason that it's illegal. So when you talk about the Tory right, it's a bit like, well, which right? Which leads me to Matt.
Hello.
And your choice, it's Miriam Cates and her merry friends in the NatCon conference.
Yeah, I mean, I think just coming off the back of what Rachel was talking about, I think I have found this year increasingly baffling how many different groups we have to understand who they are, and that every week there's a new one. It feels like they're all groups as well. It's the Common Sense group, the Northern Research group. I'm assuming next year there'll be like the Southern Gut Feelings gang. The Are You Thinking What We're Thinking? I bet you are. Read it on Wikipedia. Absolute Lads Collective. These sort of places. I think the thing that always annoys me is that their research, it's always got the word research in it. It's got to the point now where every time I hear the word research, I think it must be right wing. There's sort of I don't know where they're getting research from. It feels like it's, I don't know, they're local Wetherspoons, essentially.
Common Sense, as we also know, is also right-wing.
Yeah, exactly. They're just taking all these words that are meant to be kind of neutral and they're just making them right-wing, essentially. Free speech is another one, obviously.
Northern is right-wing now.
Northern is right-wing, yeah.
The Northern Research Group.
The Northern Sense Group. The Northern... you could change all of the words in all of those groups and no one would really know the difference between any of them, I think.
If somebody came up and called the Reasonable Moderates Group, I would just assume that it wanted to bring back hanging and ban abortion,
That's the point, isn't it? And so, if common sense is what they want, then I have neither of those things. But I look back at the speech that Miriam Cates made. I'd forgotten just how sort of mad at the beginning of it is, where she talks about the biggest problem facing this country today, and it's not climate change, it's not Russia, it's not China, it's not economic problems. And she goes through this whole list of things where you go, God, you're right, there's a load of big problems. And she says, it's babies. We're not having enough babies. And that's it, that, they're massively obsessed with the sort of fertility rate. She blamed it on cultural Marxism that is systematically destroying our children's souls.
Do you know who else was really into people having more babies and didn't like cultural Marxism?
Is it your friend again?
It's that guy.
So I went to her fertility conference, an event in Parliament.
Thank God you said conference event rather than fertility, just like thing.
Me and Miriam Cates talking about fertility. I totally would discuss it with her. It's interesting because the graphs that they have from different countries of how the birth rate has fallen really are quite terrifying. When you look at the demographics, aging population, what are you going to do when you have far fewer young people and workers supporting people who have increasingly complex and expensive care needs? Like, all of that is a really serious thing. And we had this whole seminar where the researchers were sort of looking at why this might be the case, and sort of economic factors. Housing's a big one, obviously childcare's a big one. And then at the end, it was a really interesting session, but somebody asked, each of the panelists to come up with like one policy intervention that they thought would help this, because one of the things that came out of it was that women are not having as many children as they would like to have because the economic pressures are too much. And I was sitting there going, it's obvious, it's build more houses and make childcare affordable and make employers and businesses have more family-friendly policies. And she was like, what we should have is a nationwide public awareness campaign that it's really cool to be a mother, and it should be led by the Princess of Wales. And that was her policy suggestion.
Right. Well, I'm looking forward to that next year.
Is that not making you want to have kids right now?
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of weird stuff going on. I mean, we talked about the NatCon conference a great deal at the time.
Yeah.
But Miriam Cates and Danny Kruger, that wing of things, really freak me out because they're very religious and a little bit Volkish.
There's a sort of old-fashioned, very right-wing morality that's kind of masquerading as something modern and different. And as you say, it's all about the graphs. It's all about the we're just looking at the demographics. But yeah, if you just dig even slightly under the surface, it does feel very, very old-fashioned, very traditionalist in the bad way, I think.
Amazingly, they're not the most right-wing people that we're going to be talking about on today's show.
Right.
I think I've found on the top trumps of right-wing people, I think I have the winning card, which I will play later.
I just want to say something about Suella Braverman I just thought about, which relates to this. I think we're lucky in this country in this sense that we don't have a sort of presidential system, because I feel like she has huge name recognition in the country. I think she does have a certain amount of support in the country, but I think it's actually, as Rachel's pointed out, it's not really working in the Tory party so much anymore. So I think if she's one of the few people in the current Tory party.
Suella Braverman, she is arguably the least popular politician in the country, though, according to polls.
Yeah, but I think that can work to your advantage in a weird way. I think being very unpopular is weirdly better than being just sort of somewhere in the middle.
I think better of the British population, Matt.
Maybe. I think there's also a British electoral point about Miriam Cates, who's obviously become very prominent for all the reasons sort of discussed and quite prominent within the Conservative Party. She is almost certainly going to lose her seat. She's got a majority of around 7,000. You never make any hard predictions in politics, but she is unlikely to be an MP in the next Parliament, and unless she moves to a different seat. So one of the things about our system is that somebody can be very prominent and exerts power and influence, and a couple of thousand constituents can just go, nah.
Yeah. Where's the Portillo moment,
I can't wait for election night. It's going to be like, Portillo after Portillo, isn't it? I'm going to do one now. Now, I hate to attack the British public, but it's the voters of Uxbridge and South Ruislip.
All of them.
I mean, specifically 495 of them. That was the winning margin of Steve Tuckwell in Boris Johnson's old seat in the July by-election. He approached it as a referendum on ULEZ. His Labour opponent also didn't like ULEZ, and then Keir Starmer blamed ULEZ for the loss. Because I think it's the only by-election that Labour didn't win that it thought it might, even though it was the former Prime Minister's old seat in the home counties. Anyway, so Starmer didn't seem to go too far in that direction. Throwing Sadiq Khan under the bus was pretty grim, but it was Sunak who really ran with it, binning various green policies, not the net zero target, but everything that might get you to the net zero target. And he has just promised brilliantly to reroute almost £250 million of HS2 money to London roads, but still branded as
a Network North project.
Network North project. And it goes, good news, we're going to take all the money for trains to the north and spend it on roads in London. That's New North. So I also feel like I should bring in perhaps some of the commentators here who misread this very, very slim victory in a seat which under normal circumstances Labour would not have been expected to win as a kind of ringing rejection of ULEZ and a vote in favour of air pollution. So the whole thing was a very regrettable incident, and I think quite a few things would be different had those 495 people who I hate individually just stayed at home or voted for the other guy who also didn't like ULEZ.
So how are you doing this, Dorian? Are you doing it by timestamp? Like, is it the first 495 to vote that day, the last 495 to vote?
I think it's just I think it's safer to blame all of the Tory voters in Uxbridge and South Ruislip.
Okay.
Or the 500 Labour voters who didn't turn up.
Who didn't turn up.
Yeah, who just stayed in bed.
But they might be listening, whereas I'm assuming the Tory voters aren't listening, so that I can just be rude about them.
Okay, good to know.
Rachel,
Yeah.
this is one that you actually have personal experience of.
I was there.
Back from the grave, like Marley's ghost, only she hasn't learned anything. It's Anne Widdecombe. What did she say in your presence?
It is Anne Widdecombe, who was a Conservative MP and then was briefly a Brexit Party MEP.
She was, yeah.
And so isn't a Conservative anymore. And that was a point that she sort of made when they were like, oh, yes, you've got the sort of Tories over here. She's not Conservative anymore. But this was in May, and it was about the cost of living crisis. And I was on Politics Live with her, and the story was about inflation, particularly food inflation, and how whatever the headline rate of inflation was, it was impacting consumer goods, foods and basic foods more than other things. So the price of kind of a Waitrose takeaway meal hadn't gone up by very much, but the price of Basics own brand food really had, and they did this little model of a cheese sandwich. So like Basics white bread, depending on your supermarket, cheese, margarine, sort of how that much had increased in cost, and kind of went around the panel going, what should the government do about this? And Anne Widdecombe's reaction was, well, you don't have the cheese sandwich then, obviously. And I'm in the clip, and you can sort of see me go, like, because I'm very used to, I think we're all used to politicians making comments about the reason young people can't buy homes is because they spend too much on Netflix and avocado toast and fancy coffees, and the narrative that people who are on benefits, they have flashy TVs or whatever. But this was very specifically about pretty much the most basic meal you can imagine and how it had almost doubled in cost. And her attitude on national TV was, well, just don't eat then. And I was sort of trying to press that there'd been an earlier story as well about infant formula milk and baby food and the number of children who were going hungry at schools. And I sort of made those points to her, and she was just like, just don't buy the cheese, don't buy the ingredients for the cheese sandwich. I don't really know how to continue with this because I don't really have a comment on it. That's just what happened.
The Anne Widdecombe diet plan. Just don't eat anything.
I quite like the...
I think I clipped it at the time and put it out, and it went viral, didn't it, Rachel?
Yeah, it went viral. It was one of the Guardian's most read stories at one point in the politics of former Conservative.
It's like, just don't eat cheese.
I do quite like
There's
it,
your
though,
answer.
because I think one can perhaps be under the illusion that because the Tory party is currently so awful, as with the Republican Party, that you almost feel like, well, it fell from a height.
From any height.
And that in the old days, people just wouldn't say outrageous things. And then Anne Widdecombe appears like a revenant.
She was a minister.
She was right. She was around way back when, and then she just comes back and goes, I too can be tremendously callous. It's not just young people who are about to lose their seats. Alex.
Yes.
I'm really struck by the fact, and perhaps this says something about the, the really feminist advances of the Tory party, that many of the people we're singling out here are women, which I feel a bit bad about, but they are individually bad. Nadine Dorries, famous for politics and fiction, and has merged the two with her book, The Plot.
Yes. I mean, Nadine Dorries, I really think she has been quite consequential this year. Probably more than any other year, even when she was a Secretary of State. I don't think she influenced politics as much as she did this year. Remember, she resigned and then refused to actually resign. So for months, we had the spectacle of not knowing whether she would put the actual paperwork through so that the people in her constituency could vote for someone and have some actual fucking representation in the House of Commons. Her attendance record was atrocious anyway. She became a presenter on GB News way before she resigned. Passionate admirer and defender and enabler of Boris Johnson, obviously. And I genuinely think she's one of the people who either has zero self-understanding or is taking the piss. And I can never tell
No,
which.
I'm pretty sure it's the first one.
I'm not sure, like today she
Is this the Christmas card thing?
No, today she tweeted to say that it's appalling how deals are done in back rooms, and this basically means our democratic process is a joke. And it's like, you are someone who literally flounced off because your mate promised you in a backroom deal that they would make you a legislator for life.
Yeah, no self-awareness. That's not a gag.
And you're complaining about backroom deals. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure. The book itself has actually provided one real story, which I think has legs. And it's about Downing Street trying to influence the BBC through Downing Street, trying to influence who was appointed the head of Ofcom. I think there are questions to answer on that one.
Oh yeah, Alan Rusbridge has been running with that, hasn't he?
Yeah, and both Downing Street and BBC, their answers so far have created really more doubt around this issue than settled it.
So hats off to Nadine Dorries, is what you're saying.
No, I'm not. I'm not saying that at all. I just think hats off to her, I guess, if the objective of being in public life is to stir shit. She's a fantastic shit stirrer.
There we go.
But I don't consider that a huge compliment. And then there's this short passage from her book that I would like to read about Ian Duncan Smith, which I think in itself qualifies her for top 12. He looked at me through narrowed, bright blue eyes. Not for the first time, I thought to myself, he was probably really quite good looking in his day.
Wow.
She used to write romance novels.
She still does.
She still does, yeah.
The quiet.
Just making me think of Ian Duncan Smith in that way, even for a fraction of a second.
The quiet man is turning up the sexy volume. Well, you mentioned GB News. Lots to say. We're going to start with Lawrence Fox, whose misogynist rant about journalist Ava Evans received the most Ofcom complaints of the year. So congratulations to Lawrence. It took down his GB News career, Dan Wootton's, and the Reverend Calvin Robinson's. Is he a reverend or is he a fake?
I actually know about this. Do you want to?
Do you? Go on.
Okay, so
yes.
He is not anything to do with the Church of England, and the Church of England rejected him, saying that he basically wasn't appropriate to be a Church of England cleric, and he was associated with an American church. Now I think it's a different one, and basically you don't need, it's not a regulated profession. There are lots of different churches, there are lots of different sects, branches of Christianity, and he has found one that will accept him and has chosen to dress in that particular way. But I do like it when people call him a cosplaying vicar.
Yeah.
He got rejected from the the Church of England. The Church of England
He's basically like those people that get a certificate online so they can marry their friend.
Well, my cat has been ordained by the Universal Church of Life. The very Reverend Cleo Hepzibah Cunliffe is available for all your spiritual needs. I'm totally not joking about this. But the Church of England is sort of the definition of a broad church. So if they refuse to accept him, that says something.
Well, GB News is a very broad church. Everything from the right to the radical right to the far right are welcome. I think the main point I'm going to make, because we've talked about it quite a lot over the year, is that I don't think that it can be both things. It cannot be a sort of a home for former and sitting Tory MPs and crackpot city with outright conspiracy theorists like Neil Oliver, Calvin Robinson before he flounced off. Quite a lot of stuff which is sort of getting into great replacement theory territory, and that terrible guy Ben Leo, I'm not sure if you saw that clip where he was just sort of going, it's too many, not white people in London. And then
can you say how much I enjoyed how uncomfortable that made me?
One of the hosts said, I can't remember exactly what he said. I mean, it was racist, obviously. And then so another GB News presenter went, well, what about me then? And Ben Lear did the classic kind of, oh, not you, mate. You're all right. You can stay. So on the one hand, it's sort of, I think it should just be, I suppose, considered as grotesque as much of the content it pumps out is. The fact that respectable people go on there as guests, the fact that it's okay for MPs to have shows, I think just whitewashes all this other stuff. I don't think it should be allowed to be both.
And Ofcom keep upholding complaints against them and keep saying, and the punishment is, we hope that next time they'll think about that a bit more. And every time I'm like, but they didn't do it last time. If there's no actual kind of sanction, then what's the point of having Ofcom?
No, they're just going to keep doing the thing.
Yeah.
I would just like to say, in defence of GB News, genuinely, that there are a lot of particularly young journalists and young producers who get their break there because it's really hard to get into journalism and they get really good experience with live reporting. And I say this knowing people who work there and who find it very difficult when they are doing kind of normal journalism. And then someone like Lawrence Fox sort of comes and says that, or there's anti-vax content, and it makes it like a lot harder for them in their careers. And you could say, well, don't work there, but there's not like a plethora of
That's
good
what the station is.
jobs.
It makes no bones about it. And it uses the other stuff, like Fox News has always done. It uses the other stuff as to give this little sort of veneer of respectability when its real purpose is to pump out extreme right politics, bigotry and conspiracy theories. And so all of that stuff, and I know what you mean about it's hard to get a job or whatever, but that they are the whitewash department. They are the respectable cover for what it's really there for. Now, part two of our Villains of the Year, we are moving beyond basically the Tory party, looking further afield. Rachel, start us off with former comedian, YouTube host, former best-selling author, and alleged sex criminal Russell Brand.
Yeah, I would find Russell Brand very difficult to categorise as well because it's kind of comedy, but, you know, in recent years it's sort of been leading an alternative political movement, big on anti-vax, big on big pharma, has a weird cult following. And yeah, in September, the Sunday Times and Channel 4 together ran this incredibly powerful joint investigation where they had reports from 5 women documenting accusations of rape, sexual assault, emotional abuse, spanning 10 years, basically the height of his mainstream political career. And the details are really quite harrowing. It was an amazing piece of journalism. It took the journalists involved, I think, 2 years to piece it all together, talking to the women involved, to their friends, to their families, to lawyers, to his representatives. And I never particularly liked his comedy. I always found that there was a bit of a edge to it that I found very distasteful. Other people enjoyed it. I'm not saying that if you enjoyed it, you were in any way sort of supporting this. But it's one of those examples of someone who this seems to have been a massive open secret in the entertainment world. And so many people since have said that they knew about it or they heard about it. And there are clips now of people talking about Russell Brand and something is almost said or it's hinted at and you're like, everyone knew. So really, I think this is actually a hero's story, the heroes being the journalists who pushed this forward and the editors and legal experts who worked with them and enabled them to publish it. I guess the sad thing is it doesn't really seem to have dented his popularity at all with his fan club.
That's what I wonder, because he's still doing his YouTube.
And making a lot of money from that.
Well, yeah, but I noticed that he's like, he is now punting gold and silver. He's become a gold bug, which is the classic sign of a crank. And I thought maybe he's not getting the advertising he used to if it's now these kind of quite shady, like, the world is unstable, you know, the Armageddon may be round the corner. Why not invest in solid, precious metals that you can keep in your bunker? So something seems to have. He's definitely that sort of semi-mainstream legitimacy he had has gone, and yet there's this whole world, like you say, where you don't need that, and you can continue to make money and have a large audience.
I think
and
it's
there's no
both.
legal proceedings yet.
No, there are there is a police investigation. Obviously, we should say he denies all of this, and there have been more people coming forward since that report went out. And I think it can be both, because he was veering down the conspiracy theory route before this story broke. Sort of anti-vax stuff, anti-politics. They're not telling you the truth. He sort of speaks directly to his subscribers. You and I, we get it in our little cult. Like it's all the classic hallmarks of a conspiracy theory, and this idea that people, particularly on the internet, can build followings as gurus essentially. And I, Russell Brand, can help fix your life. And yes, any sense of mainstream veneer has obviously gone completely. But I think for people who do find him very appealing and charismatic and almost magnetic, the allegations, similar to what we were talking about with Trump at the start of the show, any allegations against him, any action against him is proof that there is a sort of deep state matrix-like conspiracy that's all out to get him. So I don't think you're going to change those people's minds.
Yeah, no, the independent media, of course, which people were sort of celebrating on the left and has created some opportunities on the left, but it does mainly seem to benefit people like Russell Brand or Tucker Carlson, been from Fox News and now setting up his own network. It's like, as so many things about the internet, they were like, it's going to be brilliant, there's going to be all this freedom. And then it didn't quite work out for in the way that I would have liked.
I think in the comedy world as well, there's a bit of a sense of slight kind of anticlimax afterwards as well, because as you say, that had been very much an open secret, I think, and lots of people who had certainly heard things, and it's all rumour, nobody ever knows, it's obviously all denied, so you can't ever say that this was something that most people knew for certain, obviously. But I think also there was a bit of a sense of maybe this is the beginning of something. Maybe this is the beginning of more people being...
Comedy's Me Too.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, but
it hasn't really happened like that. And, within the comedy world, within Facebook groups and things and WhatsApp groups, I'm sure, there has been a number of other names, probably not quite as well-known names, people saying, what about this person? What about this person? These, I've heard a bit of that. But as you say, the problem is you need a huge amount of time and effort and money and also legal sort of help to be able to put an investigation like this together. And unfortunately, most of the other people involved are not quite as successful and famous, and therefore no one's going to spend the time investigating them. So it's a weird situation where only the very most famous people who are accused of anything like this will ever get that amount of attention.
And they're the ones who could probably survive it.
Yeah, and whereas there's lots of people around, sort of the middle or the bottom layers of these sorts of industries who can get away with stuff.
Alex, Geert Wilders is yours. Is that how you say his name?
Geert Wilders.
Geert Wilders.
If you want to be...
The funny-haired far-right Dutchman. And now, a month after the election in the Netherlands, there is still no new prime minister, which certainly tells you something about proportional representation. Why have we chosen him to represent the far right in 2023?
Well, you could have gone for Javier Milei, you could have gone for Giorgia Meloni, but he's very much part of a movement, as it were. The reason I chose him is because I think the story in the Netherlands is particularly a relevant one to us, because it is a story of disunity. The previous government fell apart because the coalition couldn't agree on what to do about immigration. Two parties wanted stricter immigration rules, two parties disagreed. And that was very much an issue that Geert Wilders was feeding into the press. So he dragged them onto his agenda effectively, and then they fell apart because they couldn't find a solution to something that is actually quite unsolvable. For a mature Western economy that needs the labor, turning the population against immigration is a horrible thing, because the only way you solve it is by hurting the economy. So having done that, he then succeeded in becoming the sort of top person in that election. Again, because there was absolutely no coalition on the other side. So he only got 23% of the vote. But that was enough because everyone else got 18, 12, 13, There's loads of parties in the teens, basically.
Do you know another far-right leader who thrived electorally because of a disunited opposition?
Yes, that guy again.
That guy.
Is that what we call a callback?
Yeah. The dude with the tape. But I mean, the situation is just utterly fascinating in the Netherlands, and I would suggest to anyone to go and read what is going on now. They've appointed a person called an informateur, who basically investigates the possibility of a coalition deal and reports to Parliament. It's a fascinating process. But the reason I wanted to choose Geert Wilders, the other reason, is that recently I found out something that absolutely floored me. And my apologies if you all know this and the listeners all know this, but Geert Wilders is part Indonesian, and he dyes his hair blonde and wears blue contact lenses to erase the features of that heritage, which I just think it's an extraordinary thing to find about someone so overtly racist and xenophobic that, they have this internalized just loathing that means they try and make themselves Aryan.
Extraordinary.
Did you all know that?
No.
Or what? Or is it as stunning to you as it was to me when I found out?
Yeah.
And if that's, I think, I think if that's common, if that's knowledge, if there's something that's well known, I find that bizarre that his party has no problem with that.
Yeah.
Or,
But Suella Braverman is a xenophobic racist.
Yes.
It's not,
Yes.
it's no obstacle. You can come from any background.
It's true.
I know, but if Suella Braverman came out tomorrow with blonde hair and blue contact lenses, that would be notable.
No,
right?
that would be a departure. Matt, can you pronounce this?
Luis Rubiales?
Rubiales, that's
Rubiales,
it. Yes.
I think,
Matt, this is actually a good news story wrapped in a villain. Luis Rubiales, remind people who that guy is.
Yeah, I just found him kind of fascinating because he was one of the few examples of a villain, and I think the next one I might talk about similarly in a different way, who kind of got a comeuppance. He was, we all remember him, I think, as the head of the Spanish FA, who decided that the medal ceremony of the World Cup, where Spanish women's team beat the English women's team in the final, that was the moment he would just kiss all the players and grab them and pick them up and swing them round, and there was various touching and groping and things. And at the time, I remember saying it reminded me of those guys who use their girlfriend's graduation ceremony as the moment to propose, that they've decided that they're going to make her special moment about them, basically. But obviously a much worse version of that, because this wasn't a proposal, but something much worse than that. And he also grabbed his crotch and was sort of pointing at people at the time. It's just come out, actually, the FIFA report into the whole incident's come out, and apparently it wasn't just the Spanish players. Apparently he was also kissing and cupping and stroking the face of one of the England players as well. So he was pretty full on, kind of in that weird sort of sexual assault mode for the whole of that moment. But this obviously blew up at the time, became this huge issue. The player who he kissed on the mouth was Jenny Hermano, and she said, I didn't want this to happen. And he immediately came out and rubbished her and dismissed it. And then he sort of apologised. And then he did a press conference where everyone thought he was going to resign. But he didn't. He came out and he said 5 times, I am not resigning. And then his mum went on hunger strike. And it was
that was my favourite bit of the story.
Yeah. The whole thing just became this mad sort of international. I was reading back through it today and just reminding myself of how mad this process was, that it just got more and more insane. And
But then there was the manager of the team.
Yeah.
Who was also, despite the fact that, this was the World Cup winning team, he was kind of like an unpopular misogynist that none of the team liked. Like the whole thing.
Well, some of them
was
hadn't.
Astonishing.
Some players had refused to play while he was manager before any of this started because he had a reputation for sort of sexism and misogyny and they didn't want to play. And that got sort of swept under the rug during the matches because it was sort of
they were
Spain's
winning.
victory. They're winning, yeah.
But it's extraordinary the way that they not only won the World Cup, but also sort of reformed to some extent Spanish football.
He got sacked, and I hadn't realised this, but it became a whole movement in Spain. It became their sort of Me Too movement, essentially. Apparently, it started with a tweet from a very famous Spanish women's footballer, one of the most decorated individual women's footballers in the world, Alexia Putellas, and she tweeted, "Esto es unacceptable. This is unacceptable. Se acabó. It's over." And that became the sort of Me Too, the hashtag Se acabó. And then loads of other players came out in support, and it became a kind of movement across Spain. He was banned by FIFA from football.
He's now selling gold on his YouTube channel.
I'm assuming he does. That's the thing. This is the thing. It feels like, and my favourite little sort of detail about this is that FIFA banned him. The Spanish team banned, he was basically banned from football forever. He still hasn't really apologised. He's still sort of saying it wasn't, it wasn't as a big a deal and everything.
I hope his mum has had a cheese sandwich.
Yeah, I think so. She went on hunger strike for, I think, a day and a half and then stopped because she was
hungry.
That's just hungry. A diet.
Yeah.
That's not a hunger strike.
That's just forgetting to eat for a couple of days.
It's not a hunger strike. It's not snacking, basically.
No, exactly.
There are people on amphetamines that have done that.
The only person I could find, though, who came out in support of him at the time was, this is the last line on an article I read about, was Woody Allen came out at the time and said,
well, that's all right then.
Come on, it's just a kiss. Come on. People should be allowed to express affection to each other in public. And I did feel like, Woody, come on.
Now all I've got in my head is it started out with the kiss and then it ended up like this.
that should be the title of the autobiography.
Senor Brightside.
Yeah. Is Dorian going to tell us now that Hitler also snobbed some athlete?
Yeah, we didn't know that about Jesse Owens at the 1936 Olympics. If he groped him, everything could have been very different.
So I think that this might be the most hair-raising right-winger of the lot. Mike Johnson, as his name suggests, previously a rather sort of dull, anonymous man, until 51-year-old congressman from Louisiana replaced Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker. It was a big old shit show where Kevin McCarthy was ousted and then they couldn't agree on a replacement because of all the factions, the five families, I guess, of the Republican Party. And basically Mike Johnson won because nobody really was following him. They just didn't know who he was. Probably mixed him up with another Mike Johnson that they knew at school or a footballer.
I thought it was Michael Johnson, the runner, who was quite good.
Could be that.
Yeah.
Anyway, he particularly opposes the minimum wage, taxes, social security, affordable healthcare and aid to Ukraine. He is also a fanatical Christian conservative, a climate denier, who says that in the Bible, it's your duty to take dominion of the earth and subdue it. By coincidence, he's received $340 million in donations from oil and gas companies, who also presumably believe very much in the Bible. He blames abortion, which he opposes in all circumstances, for school shootings. So when you tell a generation of people that life has no value, no meaning, that it's expendable, then you do wind up with school shooters. However, he also blames evolution for school shooters. He says, people say, how can a young person go into their schoolhouse and open fire on their classmates? Because we've taught a whole generation, a couple generations now of Americans, there's no right or wrong. It's about survival of the fittest, and you evolve from the primordial slime. I mean, that's not quite what the theory of evolution says. It's probably not to blame for school shootings, but he does believe the Earth is 6,000 years old. Anyway.
Also, it's a bit rich for someone to complain about the survival of the fittest from someone who wants to abolish free healthcare, I would say, because that's what he's all about, the survival of the fittest.
He's about all of the right-wing things that you can possibly think of. He obviously doesn't like immigration and tried to overturn the 2020 election, but he did at least not blame that for school shootings.
And very much, didn't he start his term by doing prayers or something on the, in a very sort of church and state together thing?
There was a lot of stuff that came out after he'd been made House Speaker
that you really think maybe should have come out before.
Yeah. There was no vetting. It was literally such a mess. So they were just like, this boring-looking guy with glasses with a boring name.
Well, the one that we hate slightly less than we hate the others.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Who turns out to be as lunatic a Republican as one can imagine. And it does remind you that most people talk about, Trump and what has Trump done to the Republican Party? It's like guys like this are pretty common in the Republican Party and have far more sort of lunatic beliefs than Donald Trump, who basically believes in himself and power.
Well, it's a bit like
he's not full-on Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit like the Tory party since 2017, 2019, that it has been purged of all of its more sort of centrist, leftist people. So anyone that, if you just pick, I find this all the time. I'll see a new MP on telly, a new minister who's just been appointed, and I think, I want to hear this one. Oh, they're mad as well. Like it takes seconds to kind of realise it.
I should apologise to any listeners called Mike or Michael Johnson. It's not a boring name. It's just, it's hard. It's maybe not as striking a name as some in politics.
Sounds like you just got an email from Michael Johnson when he said that.
I do feel like I've just basically been going on and on about how terrible this name is.
Should we delete the Patreon backers?
It's a good, solid name. Matt, we have here another good, solid name, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Remind us, this is quite early in the year. Obviously, his year started strong.
Yeah.
Has not ended well.
Yeah, the last few months. Or
ended early.
Yeah, the last few months he's barely made an appearance.
He's really kind of lost momentum.
He has dropped off.
Why? Why did his star fall?
Well, I think probably it's fair to say that he's the winner of the Fuck Around and Find Out prize. Of 2023. He was the name that we all had to learn how to say.
And spell.
And is it Yevgeny, Prigozhin. Also, the head of the group whose name, again, I never know how to say. Is it Wagner Group? Is it Wagner Group? Is it Wagner Group? I've never worked that out. But he was the head of the Wagner Group. I'm going to go with that. Yeah. He was the creator of the Internet Research Company. Another use of the word research, which is bad. Which sounds good, doesn't it? The Internet Research Company. And in fact,
do they research the internet?
Yeah, it's great. The Northern Internet Research Company. Basically a massive troll farm. They were responsible for many of the sort of various dodgy things happening in the 2016 election in the US. And he led an armed mutiny back in June against Putin, and then mysteriously, almost totally coincidentally, died in a plane crash just 2 months later.
Oh, that
it was weird, though. The whole thing was weird. I was having a picnic in the park, and we were getting a bit tipsy, and one of my friends was like, oh, there's a coup against Russia and Putin, and we're like, okay, we'll definitely check in with that. We're going to carry on with our picnic. And then like 7 p.m, I checked it again, and it's like, oh no, it's over. I missed it. I missed the coup. But it was this bizarre thing that he seems to have just like spontaneously decided to march on Moscow. And I don't know very much about Russian geopolitics. There's this thing that happens where something happens on Twitter and suddenly everyone is an expert on Russian geopolitics. I am not. But I think I would have been able to tell you that if you are going to launch a military coup against Vladimir Putin, it's you win or you die, right? You come at the king, you better not miss. It's that. So
it's not like, I gave it a shot.
That is literally what it was.
You've got to give me credit.
And then he went off to...
back to work.
He went off to Belarus, and there was this idea that like he and Putin had come to some kind of deal and it was all going to be fine. It was never all going to be fine.
I was very much mixed emotions because it was very much the worst person you know made a great point meme, wasn't it? Because you kind of feel like anyone who's going to bring down Putin must have something going for them. And then, of course, you look into him and it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want him near the nuclear button in any way at all. I missed this, though.
It is Wagner, by the way.
It is Wagner.
Matt.
Okay.
Yeah, because its first commander, Utkin, was a great admirer of anyone?
Hitler.
Nazi guy.
I was going to say, you know who else liked Wagner? Yeah, okay, good.
It is named after the composer.
Right.
Oh, I didn't. Oh, okay.
So that is Hitler's fourth appearance in the podcast.
There's going to be another one because tangentially, because obviously he then he left the scene, but the Wagner Group is still very much around, and they are doing a lot of horrible things around the world, particularly parts of Africa, Mali, Central African Republic, Sudan particularly. There's been 7 coups in that part of Africa since 2020. Big part of it is gold mining, back to gold. Apparently, they're spending so much time in that part of Africa, they started calling themselves the Africa Corps after the Nazis. So after the Rommel army from the Second World War. So gold is
gold is obviously the theme of the episode.
Well, gold is important for Russia because of sanctions. And they're putting a huge amount of effort into getting more and more gold out of these mines because they can then get around sanctions because everyone needs gold.
That's interesting the way that Russell Brand promotes.
Are you saying that he's the next head of the Wagner
sanction-free
Group?
precious metals. I'm just saying, it's interesting.
Can I just one quick thing, which I hadn't heard this until I looked into it again today, but Putin said a couple of months ago after Prigozhin died, he said it's possible that the way he died would have that grenades may have been detonated whilst being handled by Wagner mercenaries who were drinking or using cocaine stupidly on the plane. Unfortunately, he said, no examination was carried out for the presence of alcohol or drugs in the blood of the victims. In my view, this should have been carried out, but it wasn't.
Oh man,
what a
they
shame!
Really missed it.
We missed it.
Yeah. It's a bit like all the falling out of Windows.
Yeah.
It just seems to be probably there should be something about what neurologically connects poor balance and the mishandling of grenades with opposition to the great leader Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
Because there must be something medical.
If I ever took, and I'm not saying I would ever do this, but if I ever took on Putin in a coup, I think I would spend the rest of my life lying on the ground, never getting on a plane, never getting anywhere near a window. That's key.
But there was a conspiracy theory that it wasn't him on the plane and that it was somebody else. And this is actually very useful for him because now everyone thinks he's dead. He can change his name, get plastic surgery, and disappear. So I'm just going to throw that out there for those who want a little bit of balance.
That sounds totally legit. I will subscribe to your YouTube channel.
Buy gold. Buy gold.
Rachel, as if to pull everything together, all the different threads of the world in 2023, Elon Musk.
Yes. Who has been my villain of the week more than once throughout the year and is now my villain of the year.
Unstoppable.
Well, Twitter still exists, so there's that. He's my villain of the year anyway because of what he has done to Twitter, which is a social media platform that I absolutely loved, and not just because I just got to 40,000 followers at the point that it all started collapsing. And it hasn't been the implosion, I guess, that people expected, but it has been a sort of drip, drip, drip of this is worse and worse and worse. So first they let people buy blue ticks, which was annoying and weird, but fine. Then they took away the blue ticks of anyone who wasn't paying for it. So now a blue tick means the opposite. You absolutely cannot trust this person because they have handed their bank details over to Elon Musk. Then he rebranded it as X. It's not Twitter anymore. It's X. It is Twitter. It is Twitter. Which is this? I looked it up that tweet became a verb it was the Oxford English Dictionary's word of the year in 2014. So it's nearly 10 years. People have been like, that's amazing brand recognition. Totally nixed that. But more than that, it's about encouraging the monetization of hate speech, conspiracy theories. Twitter keeps asking me to sign up for Twitter Blue, saying that I could make money off my tweets, which obviously I'm not going to do. But the people who are doing that, it's an industry now. You can see it. You can see how content has gone from this fun place that people used to chat and share stories, and you could actually go for expert information. Now it is a platform where there is a business case for saying the maddest shit possible and monetizing it, and that is what it pumps into your feed. And the whole thing is just very depressing and sad to use. And he's let a whole lot of people back on it. Casey Hopkins, Tommy Robinson, Donald Trump, who ironically doesn't want to come join Twitter because he's got his own social media network. And there's been all
Even Alex Jones the other day.
Is he back?
Yeah, yeah.
He's back.
God.
Well, I think Elon Musk is an interesting case study in the taxonomy of the right. Is that if your Miriam Cates and your Danny Krugers and even your Mike Johnsons are they've got this kind of religious fanaticism to their beliefs, that there is a sort of consistency. Elon Musk is somebody that was sort of not particularly political, I wouldn't say moderate, but not extreme. And all the positions that he's assumed in the last 18 months pretty much tell you what the kit is now. It doesn't necessarily make much sense. So, you're a little bit weird about COVID and lockdown. You don't like Ukraine. You don't like trans people. it's all a big sort of jumble. And in a way, I think he's a more representative figure of what right-wing politics is now.
He's sort of definition of anti-woke. Although, interestingly,
Right.
and I love this, he can't go too far and too hard on climate change isn't real because his main business is selling electric cars and solar batteries.
Yeah.
So he has to, he's often asking questions when it comes to the climate skeptics, but he can't, fully denounce the fact that climate change is happening because his fortune is built on it, which I find this sort of delicious irony in all the other madness that's going on. I wouldn't trust him, to send me to Mars, though. That's what the last year has taught me.
No, it's kind of amazing how much of his business was sort of built on trust and a sense that he had a very big and clever brain.
And being quite cool. People wanted a Tesla because he was this cool figure who was going to revolutionize space travel. And now it's sort of the opposite.
Yeah.
In a recent survey, the America's most hated companies, the 3 of the top 5 are the Trump Organization, the Fox Corporation, and Twitter.
Wow.
And what will annoy him most about that is that it's still Twitter.
But that didn't stop Rishi Sunak, actual Prime Minister of the actual United Kingdom, doing a Q&A interview session where he basically asked Musk questions that amounted to, how are you so awesome? And it was one of the weirdest political events that I've ever seen.
But it was like he was interviewing Elon Musk from 2016.
Yeah.
When he'd been in an Iron Man movie and Tesla and SpaceX were really successful. Not this absolute electric car crash of a human being that we have seen for the last 2 years.
And also the Prime Minister shouldn't be interviewing an entrepreneur about, that should not have been the setup. I think it was originally going to be somebody else interviewing both of them, and then it was going to be, they were going to ask each other questions, and Elon Musk is ever going to ask Rishi Sunak. Elon Musk doesn't know who Rishi Sunak is.
Who are you? Who's this guy? Is he one of my engineers? I don't know.
I think they should have had Russell Brand moderators.
That's true.
And just pulled everything together. Or the ghost of Hitler. And that is the show. Thank you and happy holidays to Alex.
Thank you.
Rachel.
Thank you.
And Matt.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for the extra bit after Demon is a Monster by Corner Shop, and a salute to our supporters. You too could get the podcast early without ads, plus lots more if you search Oh God What Now Patreon. This is our last edition until Friday the 5th of January, or a little earlier if you're a Patreon backer. In the meantime, if you need to scratch your podcast itch over the festive period, there are new episodes of Paper Cuts, The Bunker, and our new science show Why, coming out every couple of days over Christmas. Or why not binge on the 4th season of the podcast Origin Story, featuring Ian Dunt and another bald man.
It's very good.
Thank you, Alex. Also, buy gold and silver. It's reliable. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from all of us at Oh God What Now, and thanks for your support.
Season's greetings and God bless you, everyone, to Sam Ashworth, Jane, and Muggs Vernon.
Hello, huge thanks and happy Christmas from me to Steve Fullman, Claire, and David Wood.
Καλά Χριστούγεννα και ευτυχισμένο το νέο έτος from me to David Wallace, Caroline Barker and Jamie Batchelor.
And it's oh, come back all ye faithful to some of our lapsed backers who have re-upped their support. Doug Young, Martin Robson, Kate Thorsteinson and Michael McCluskey. See you next year. So
And sorry to Mike Johnson.
and apologies to all the Mike Johnsons.